So back in 2025, New Zealand found itself in the middle of an unprecedented storm of digital threats. We're talking about your personal information, everything from your health records to your home address becoming a top-tier target for criminals. So we're going to dig into the data and really understand just how vulnerable we all were.
So let me just ask you this. How safe do you think your data was that year? It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer? Well, it's anything but. Because in 2025, the digital locks on our personal lives were picked and prodded like never before. And honestly, the numbers from that year paint a pretty stark picture.
Let's start with this number right here, 1,093. That's the total number of official privacy breach notifications that the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, or the OPC as you'll hear it called, received in the reporting year that ended in June 2025. Every single one of those represents a moment where someone's personal data was left out in the open. Now, out of all those breaches, get this, 591 of them were classified as serious. That's not just a big number, it's a staggering 43% jump from the year before. This tells us the threat wasn't just growing, it was getting way more severe.
But to really get the full picture, we need to look a little closer at what these numbers actually mean. The story of what happened in 2025 is really told by two different agencies, and each one is tracking a different piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so this is super important, understanding the difference between a privacy breach and a cyber incident. The OPC, they're the ones who gave us those first numbers, they track specific privacy breaches where your data is actually compromised. But the National Cybersecurity Center, the NCSC, they cast a much wider net. They track incidents, which is, well, the whole shebang. Scams, phishing emails, all the way up to full-blown ransomware attacks.
And that number, wow. It shows you the sheer volume of attacks Kiwis were dealing with. Over 2,600 incidents in just the first 6 months. If you do the math, that averages out to an attack being reported about every 2 hours. That's a constant, relentless pressure on our digital defenses.
These incidents, they aren't just blips on a computer screen, no way. They have very real, very tangible consequences. So let's do what they always say and follow the money trail these cybercriminals left behind. $12.4 million. Let that sink in. That's the amount of direct financial loss reported to the NCSC in just the third quarter of 2025. We're talking about just 3 months. This is the cold, hard cash that gets lost when digital defenses fail.
And this chart really tells the story of just how quickly things escalated. A 118% jump in financial losses from one quarter to the next. The NCSC report points the finger at stuff like business email compromise, which is basically a fancy way of saying attackers trick employees into wiring company money straight into their accounts. Simple tactics, absolutely devastating results.
But the costs, it isn't just about the money. Behind every single one of those numbers is a human story, a real person whose privacy was just completely violated. And in late 2025, that reality hit home for hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders in a deeply personal way. Just look at this timeline. Between late December 2025 and literally the first day of January 2026, 2 massive data breaches were discovered back-to-back. It was a critical moment, a real 1-2 punch that exposed just how much of our most sensitive, personal information was truly at risk.
So first, you had Manage My Health. Someone got unauthorized access on December 30th. This one breach hit 127,000 patients. And here's the kicker. Over 400,000 of their private health documents were stolen. I mean, it just doesn't get much more sensitive than that.
And then, bam! Just 2 days later, on New Year's Day, the breach of the community platform Neighborly came to light. This one was huge. It potentially impacted up to 1 million members. The type of data stolen here was different, but as we're about to see, it was potentially just as dangerous.
And it wasn't just those two. The problem was everywhere. Major retail groups, private cancer care providers like Canopy Health, even Health NZ itself. They all reported significant breaches. It really felt like no sector was safe.
So you have to ask yourself, was this wave of attacks just a string of really bad luck? Well, no. It was a clear signal that the playbook had changed. Cybercriminals were evolving how they operate, and to protect ourselves, we have to understand the new rules of the game.
And this brings us to a really chilling new trend: hyperlocal data theft. This is when attackers target your specific geographic information, your home address, your GPS coordinates. That Neighborly breach? A perfect example. So why is this data so valuable?
because it opens the door to a whole new level of targeted scams, or even physical crimes like burglary. It's scary stuff.
So when you boil it all down, 2025 really revealed 3 key shifts in attack strategy. First, they were targeting supply chains, trying to find that one weak link to get into a much bigger organization. Second, the rise of that creepy, hyper-local data theft. And third, the old-fashioned scams, they were continuing to be incredibly and, frankly, increasingly effective.
And you should not underestimate those simple scams. Just look at this number, 271%. That's how much eShop scams, those fake online stores that pop up, exploded by in just the last quarter of 2025. It just goes to prove that sometimes the simplest attacks are still the most dangerous.
All of which leaves us with a final and pretty unsettling question to think about. As attackers shift their focus away from what you know and more towards where you are, we really have to ask ourselves, in this new landscape of digital threats, is your postcode actually becoming more valuable to a criminal than your password?